At 60, Keanu Reeves remains one of Hollywood's most beloved stars, admired for his kindness, humility, and unforgettable roles. But behind the fame and fortune lies a story few truly know. His life has been marked by loss, heartbreak, and struggles that would break most people. Fans see the calm smile, the quiet strength, but the tragedy he has endured is almost unimaginable. Once you learn the truth, you'll never look at Keanu the same way again. He didn't grow up with softness. Keanu's story starts with motion boxes, airports, new schools, new stepdads who didn't stay. His father was more absent than presence, a shape that slipped out of the frame when he was still a toddler. By 13, the last awkward meeting came and went, and silence filled the space where a dad should have been. His mother did what she could to keep the lights on and the ground steady, moving the family from Beirut to Sydney to New York and then Toronto, chasing work, chasing safety. Home for Keanu and his sister Kim was whatever room had their suitcases in it. School didn't make anything easier. Dyslexia turned every page into a puzzle. Words slid around. Reading took twice the time and 3 times the effort. Teachers mistook effort for attitude. A principal even tossed him for asking too many questions. He wasn't trying to be difficult. He was trying to understand a world that kept changing its rules. 4 high schools in 5 years left him always new, always catching up, always bracing for the next goodbye. On the ice, though, something clicked. In hockey pads and a mask, he became the Wall. A goalie has one job: hold the line. Keanu liked that clarity. Reflexes, angles, discipline. He could lose himself in it. For the first time, he had a place where he wasn't the new kid or the slow reader. He had a team. He had a dream. The Ontario Hockey League, maybe even Team Canada someday. For a boy without a permanent address, the rink felt like a future you could draw in clean, straight line. Then the bad break. One injury at 15, and the dream went down like a skate catching a rut. No drama, no speech, just the heavy quiet of something you love being taken away before it fully starts. It's the kind of moment that turns many kids bitter. Keanu didn't crack. He changed direction. He drifted toward performance because it was there, because it felt like movement, because a stage is also a kind of team. Acting didn't ask him to read fast, it asked him to be present. He could memorize, he could listen, he could commit. He took odd jobs, small TV parts in Canada, a soda commercial where he had to sell fizz like it mattered, a children's show where his earnestness accidentally worked. None of it was glamorous, all of it was practice. Los Angeles came with cheap apartments, thin wallets, and casting rooms that couldn't decide what to do with him. Leading man or drifter, stoic or surfer. He didn't have connections, he had persistence. River's Edge gave him a crack in the wall. Permanent Record widened it. Critics said there was weight behind the eyes, a sadness that didn't feel performed. Of course there was. He'd been carrying it since childhood. That's the real start of the legend people like to skip. Not a bullet-dodging chosen one, not a suited assassin, but a kid who learned early that things break. Families, plans, bodies, and you have to keep going anyway. The absent father sharpened his empathy. The revolving doors of stepfathers taught him not to be impressed by titles. Dyslexia taught him patience and process. The lost hockey career taught him how to rebuild when the map is torn in half. By the time Hollywood started paying attention, the shape of him was already set. Show up, work hard, don't complain, protect the people around you. The strength people now call mystique was simply a habit of choosing forward, one day at a time. Keanu's beginnings weren't pretty, but they forged something steadier than luck. The ability to endure, to adapt, and to keep his heart open in a world that made it easy to close it. That's the steel under the calm. That's where the grace comes from. When people talk about Keanu Reeves's career, they often jump straight to the milestones, The Matrix, John Wick, the roles that made him a household name. But the story underneath is less about instant success and more about choices, endurance, and a body that paid the price for every scene. His career wasn't built on luck alone. It was built on a stubborn sense of integrity and a willingness to put himself through real pain for the sake of art. After drifting through small Canadian shows and indie films, Keanu's first taste of big Hollywood came with Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure. Overnight, he became the goofy face of a cult comedy. The film was a hit, and audiences adored him. But Hollywood has a way of trapping actors inside the box of their first success. For years, the label stuck Airhead too light, too simple. Casting agents thought of him as the stoner kid, not someone who could carry weight on screen. Keanu hated it. He craved something deeper, but he didn't fight the stereotype with arrogance. He just kept working, kept pushing for roles that demanded more of him. The 1990s gave him that chance. Point Break paired him with Patrick Swayze in a story about adrenaline and brotherhood. Critics rolled their eyes at the surfing cop premise, but audiences felt something new. Keanu wasn't just a pretty face running through action scenes. He brought sincerity, the ability to make even the wildest setup feel grounded. Then came Speed, with Sandra Bullock at his side and a bus rigged to explode if it dropped below 50 miles an hour. The film turned into a phenomenon, and suddenly, Keanu was one of Hollywood's hottest names. Studios dangled a fortune for a sequel. Everyone expected him to say yes. He said no. That single decision defined him. Keanu turned down Speed 2 even though the paycheck would have secured him as a franchise king. He didn't believe in the script. He didn't want to repeat himself just for money. Hollywood punished him for it. Directors whispered that he was reckless, that he didn't understand the business. But Keanu never wavered. He would rather risk his career than betray his own standards. Integrity was the line he wouldn't cross. Of course, integrity doesn't shield you from struggle. The mid-90s were rough. Films like Johnny Mnemonic and Chain Reaction flopped, and critics circled like vultures, calling him wooden, limited, a fluke who had gotten lucky. The same doubts he had once heard in school, slow, difficult, not good enough, were back, now in print. But instead of folding, Keanu kept showing up. My Own Private Idaho revealed his vulnerability, his rawness, his willingness to dive into roles that weren't safe. With River Phoenix beside him, the performance stripped away the last of the airhead stereotype. People began to see what he was capable of when given the right material. Then came the role that would change his life forever, Neo in The Matrix. The Wachowskis demanded everything. Months of martial arts training, wire work that twisted his frame, choreography so punishing it bruised him black and blue. And just before shooting, doctors discovered spinal damage so severe it required surgery. Most actors would have pulled out. Keanu strapped himself into a neck brace, healed just enough to walk, and went back to training. Every kick, every jump, every iconic bullet dodge was carved out of real pain. He didn't want to let the filmmakers down, and he didn't want to let the audience down. The Matrix became a revolution in cinema, and Keanu paid for it with his own body. That sacrifice didn't end with Neo. When Hollywood was ready to discard him after a string of quieter years, he came back with John Wick. What looked like a simple revenge thriller turned into another career-defining role, but only because Keanu gave himself to it completely. He trained in gun ranges until his fingers blistered. He drilled judo throws and jiu-jitsu locks until his joints screamed. He practiced car stunts until he could spin and drift like a pro racer. He refused to hand the work off to doubles, even as his knees, already battered from decades of punishment, buckled under the strain. By the time John Wick Chapter 4 arrived, his body carried every bruise, every scar, every mile of effort. But that's who Keanu has always been. He doesn't chase shortcuts. He doesn't pad his resume with easy wins. He chooses the harder path, the one that demands sweat, pain, and sometimes blood. And that's why audiences trust him, because when he's on screen, dodging bullets or fighting through impossible odds, you know he's not faking it. He's paying for it in real time. Through all of it, he never lost the humility that set him apart. No diva behavior, no arrogance about his fame. He shared profits with crews, bought motorcycles for stunt teams, and kept his generosity quiet. He walked away from blockbusters when they didn't feel honest, and carried films that demanded more from him than most actors would tolerate. Keanu Reeves' career is a story of integrity stitched together with scars. He never let Hollywood define him, never let critics stop him, and never let money dictate his path. Every role that mattered, he earned with devotion. Every triumph came with pain. And every time the world tried to put him in a box, he quietly broke out of it, not with drama, but with persistence. That's the real arc of his career. Not just fame, not just fortune, but the steady climb of a man who refused to compromise who he was, even when the cost was high. Would you like me to expand the next point, private tragedies, public compassion, in the same style and depth? Keanu Reeves has lived much of his life in the public eye, but the deepest parts of his story have always unfolded in silence. Fame can hide sorrow behind lights and cameras, but grief has a way of slipping through, shaping a person in ways no one can fully see. For Keanu, tragedy has been a shadow that followed him from his earliest years, each loss carving into him, each heartbreak teaching him something about how fragile love and life really are. And yet, instead of turning bitter, he let those wounds turn him into one of the most compassionate men in Hollywood. The first great wound came with River Phoenix. They had met as young actors, bonded on My Own Private Idaho, and quickly became more like brothers than co-stars. River was wildfire, restless and full of brilliance, while Keanu was quiet stone, steady and grounding. Together they balanced one another, and for Keanu, who had grown up with a fractured family, that bond felt sacred. Then came the night in 1993, when River collapsed outside the Viper Room and never got up. He was just 23. For the world, it was the loss of a rising star. For Keanu, it was like losing half of himself. He didn't scream or rage. Instead, he folded into silence. Reporters asked, but he said little. Friends recalled him crying in private, his grief too heavy to share. From that point forward, you could see the loss in his performances, characters with haunted eyes, men who carried sorrow even in victory. River's absence became part of Keanu's presence. Then came Jennifer Syme. In 1998, Keanu met her at a party, and for once, his life seemed to tilt toward light. Jennifer was luminous, gentle, with a quiet soul that matched his own. They moved in together, built a simple home filled with music and laughter, and by 1999, they were expecting a child. For a man who had spent his childhood watching families fall apart, this felt like redemption, the promise of stability and joy he had always longed for. He was ready to be a father, but on Christmas Eve, their daughter Ava was stillborn. The nursery they had prepared stood empty, the little clothes folded away, the crib unused. Friends described Keanu's silence after that moment, the way his eyes seemed to carry a grief that words could not contain. Jennifer and Keanu drifted under the weight of that loss, not out of anger, but out of devastation too heavy to carry together. And then, in 2001, another blow. Jennifer died in a car accident. Just like that, the woman who had been his steady flame was gone. At her funeral, Keanu shouldered her coffin. Cameras caught his bowed head, but they couldn't capture the stillness of his grief, the silence of a man who had lost the future he had built in his heart. As if life hadn't already taken enough, his sister Kim was diagnosed with leukemia. For years, his life became a pendulum swinging between Hollywood sets and hospital rooms. On screen, he was Neo, bending reality, saving the world. Off screen, he was simply a brother, sitting by her bedside, holding her hand through endless nights, whispering reassurances while machines beeped around them. He bought a house near Los Angeles so she could stay close to treatment, canceled jobs to be with her, and refused to talk about it publicly. When she reached remission, it looked like a victory. But the scars of those years never faded. Watching someone you love suffer that way leaves a mark no applause can erase. Quietly, without attaching his name, Keanu began funding cancer research and children's hospitals. Millions of dollars given, no credit asked. It wasn't charity for headlines. It was gratitude, a whispered thanks to the doctors who had fought for his sister, and a vow to spare other families the same helplessness he had felt. This pattern became the core of who Keanu Reeves is. He endures unimaginable personal loss. Fathers gone, friends gone, partners gone, dreams shattered. And yet he responds not by closing himself off, but by opening his hands to others. He doesn't preach about kindness, he practices it in ways big and small. Stories surface constantly. Keanu spotted talking to an unhoused man, sharing a meal with him on the curb. Keanu giving up his subway seat to a stranger, no cameras in sight. Keanu surprising his stunt team with motorcycles, thanking them for their sweat and bruises. Keanu slipping away from the spotlight to quietly fund medical research that saves lives he'll never know. There's a saying that grief can harden people or soften them. In Keanu's case, it softened him. Every loss shaped his compassion, deepened his gentleness, and gave him the ability to see pain in others without turning away. He once said, "Grief changes shape, but it never ends." Those words weren't just philosophy, they were lived truth, the quiet testimony of a man who had carried sorrow for decades and refused to let it turn him cruel. The world fell in love with Keanu not just because he dodged bullets in slow motion or reinvented action cinema as John Wick. The love people feel for him comes from something deeper, the recognition that his kindness is not a performance, it is born of tragedy. He knows what loss feels like, and that's why he treats others with such patience, humility, and care. His tragedies made him human in a way fame never could, and his compassion is the legacy he builds every day, often when no one is watching. That is the paradox of Keanu Reeves. The man who has endured some of the harshest blows life can give is also the man most committed to kindness. His private grief is endless, but his public compassion is the gift he gives back to the world. And that's why people trust him, admire him, and hold him close, not just as an actor, but as proof that suffering, if carried with humility, can be transformed into love. After decades of chaos, loss, and the relentless pace of Hollywood, Keanu Reeves finally carved out something he had never really known before: a sanctuary. Not the kind of palatial mansion you'd expect from a movie star with hundreds of millions in the bank, but a home built for peace, for breathing, for silence. Tucked away in the Hollywood Hills, the house stands above the restless city, a glass and concrete retreat that doesn't shout for attention, it whispers calm. Friends who visit often remark that it doesn't feel like a celebrity estate at all. It feels more like a temple. Minimal, open, filled with light, where the sound of koi rippling in the courtyard pond replaces the noise of the world outside. For Keanu, this space is more than a house. It's a shelter from the storms that have defined his life. The walls of glass open to the skyline, letting in the rising sun as if to remind him every morning that light always returns after night. A narrow lap pool stretches toward the horizon, not built for flashy parties but for therapy and discipline. Gardens soften the edges, giving him a place to walk slowly, to think, to let his body recover from decades of punishing stunts and rehearsals. It's the opposite of Hollywood excess. The house isn't a trophy, it's a refuge. He shares this space with Alexandra Grant, the visual artist who has been his partner for several years. Their relationship didn't begin with paparazzi flashbulbs or red carpets. It grew quietly, through collaboration on books, through long conversations about art and poetry, through a friendship that slowly deepened into something more. In their first appeared together at a public gala in 2019, the world was stunned. Not because Keanu was in love, but because he had finally chosen to let that love be seen. In their home, they live simply, cooking, reading, visiting galleries, sometimes just sitting by the koi pond in silence. Their rhythm is gentle, private, far from the constant circus of Hollywood. This sanctuary marks a shift for Keanu. For years, he gave his body to roles, pushing through injuries, absorbing punishment for the sake of authenticity. By the time he reached his 60s, the toll was visible. Knees worn down, tendons stiff, scars etched across his frame. On stage and screen, he still moved like a warrior, but off-screen there was a limp, a careful lowering of his body into chairs, a quiet wince he tried to hide behind a smile. He once joked that his heart wanted to keep going, but his knees weren't so sure. Yet even here, he chose grace. He traded the brutal workouts of his younger years for gentler routines. Long swims, slow walks, stretching like prayer. He treated recovery not as defeat, but as ceremony, a way of honoring the body that had carried him so far. And still, he works. Not at Hollywood's breakneck pace, but on his own terms. The John Wick saga may or may not continue. He's left the door open for a 5th installment if his body can endure it, but he has already passed the torch in spin-offs like Ballerina. He's ventured into new genres like the comedy drama Good Fortune, showing that he still wants to explore, still wants to surprise, Even music has returned. His band, Dogstar, reunited after decades, not to chase fame, but to rediscover joy. They play small venues, intimate rooms where the bass hums low and the energy feels real. For Keanu, it's not about arenas or headlines, it's about remembering who he was before the world put him on a pedestal. Outside of the spotlight, his legacy glows brightest not in roles, but in actions. Quiet philanthropy. Millions given to hospitals and cancer research through a foundation that doesn't even bear his name. Gifts to stunt teams, shares of profits handed back to the crews who built the films beside him. Countless small gestures spotted by strangers, talking with unhoused neighbors, helping stranded travelers, giving up his subway seat. None of it staged, none of it broadcast for credit. These aren't performances, they are habits, born of a man who has lived with grief and decided that kindness was the only answer to it. What makes Keanu's story so compelling is that his sanctuary is not about withdrawal from the world, but about balance. He has learned that peace is not stillness, it's choosing what matters. It's Alexandra's laugh over applause. It's the quiet discipline of stretching in the morning instead of chasing another box office record. It's finding joy in music, in art, in companionship, instead of burning himself out in endless sequels. His house in the hills is a symbol, not of wealth, but of healing. A reminder that after decades of giving everything to others, he finally gave himself permission to rest. And yet, his legacy isn't defined by retreat. It's defined by endurance. Fans don't just see Neo or John Wick when they look at Keanu Reeves. They see a man who has suffered deeply, who has carried unbearable losses, and who has still chosen to live with dignity, humility, and generosity. The scars, the limp, the haunted eyes, they aren't flaws. They are monuments. Proof that greatness is not about invincibility, it's about resilience. In the end, Keanu's quiet sanctuary and enduring legacy teach the same lesson. Glory fades, fame dims, but kindness and integrity remain. His story isn't just about an actor who bent reality or fought endless battles on screen. It's about a man who faced real grief, carried it without bitterness, and turned it into compassion. That is why people love him, not just as a movie star, but as a human being who shows us that even after the darkest nights, morning light always returns. Would you like me to now combine all 4 points into a full narrative article about Keanu's life and legacy, so it reads as one flowing story?